We are in week 3 of Rise of the Rejects. Have you ever been rejected? If you've never been rejected, I want to meet you. If you've never been overlooked for a promotion, if you've never had the guy you want to ask you out walk up to you and you think he's going to ask you for your number and he asks you for your best friend's number, if you've never been rejected, I want to meet you. And sometimes we think that nothing good can come out of the rejection, but as we saw with Jesus, as we saw with Joseph, and we're going to see with a few other individuals today, that it is time for the rise of the rejects. I don't know that this is as much of a message as it is of a story time. Kind of like when my mom would teach me the Bible when I was a kid. And she would read me from Herbert's stories of the Bible. I don't have Herbert's mom, but I have the Message, which isn't so much a translation that you would read as a study Bible. Most of the time when I'm speaking, I'm reading out of the NIV. Probably over 90% of the time. Sometimes NIV, New International Version. Sometimes out of the ESV, which is the English Standard Version. But today I'm going exclusively Message Bible. So just in case you're new here, if you're going to buy a Bible, I would buy the NIV. Recommend maybe the ESV. The Message is just something that you want to do on the side. It's not a verse-by-verse translation, but I just love how it articulates a few things here. Go with me to 1 Samuel. You don't have the Message Bible. Look up on the screen. Anyone here have the Message Bible? No, on your phone. 1 Samuel 22. It says, so David got away and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and others associated with his family heard where he was, they came down and joined him. Not only that, but all who were down on their luck came around. Losers and vagrants and misfits of all sorts, just like us. David became their leader. There were about 400 in all. We're going to Romans chapter 9, still out of the Message, verses 25 and 26. God says, I call nobodies and make them somebodies. I call the unloved and make them beloved. In the place where they yelled out, you're nobody, they're calling you God's living children. The title of my message today is The Nobodies. The Nobodies. Have you ever been around like someone and all of a sudden you're like, you think it's a celebrity and people start crowding around and they're like, oh, it's who is it? And they're like, oh no, it's nobody. It's nobody. Sometimes we can feel like that. I'm nobody. You look at your talent, you feel like I'm nobody. You look at the resources in your life, the people that you have relationship with, and you're like, we're just a bunch of nobodies. But watch what God can do with a bunch of nobodies. God, speak to our hearts, our minds, our spirits. We want to receive everything that you have for us today. We're not going to live according to what people have called us. We're going to live according to what you have created and called us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. David had an interesting group of individuals when you think about this. David was not given the most talented, the wealthiest, the most influential. It seemed like a group of nobodies. That was like the first team that I coached when I was Ian's baseball coach. In fact, here's a little picture. This is me coaching Ian. I'm the manager of the team. And Ian right there is 8 years old. 8-year-old, back when Ian had long hair. Remember, it's like, oh, I don't think you're saying oh for me. I think you're saying oh for Ian, Though that's about the only time you'll ever see my legs, so you could take that picture down. You're wondering why we're the Yankees. Well, You see, I wasn't planning on managing, and I thought Ian was going to be playing in the rookie division, but after tryouts, they said, hey, your kid's too good, as in most of the time 7 and 8-year-olds play in rookies. He's too good. He's going to need to play in the minors. And they said, but we don't have enough managers for the minors. Would you mind managing a team? And I was like, well, that's a lot of work. Not so much the kids, but the parents. Parents are the difficult ones to deal with. The kids are awesome. You got the crazy dad and the mom out in the stands. You're just this is just, I don't want to, but they're we don't have anyone. These kids need you. And it's well, the draft the tryouts have already taken place, so what about the draft? They're we'll have, we will all help you. Nothing like other coaches that you'll be competing with helping you draft your team. So I showed up and I was if you're going to draft my team, I know what's going to happen, so I want to pick the name of our team. And it was either going to be the Giants or the Yankees, because if we were going to be the worst team, I want this Dodger fan. No way we're going to be the Dodgers. I don't want to represent the Dodgers with this group of people. So I looked at our first practice, and it's what have I ended up with here? Nobody had any expectations for this team, including me at first. But there's something nice about low expectations, is that there's no pressure. When there's a lot of pressure, because there's high expectations, the Dodgers are dealing with that now. It's early in the season. Yes, Dodger fans were yeah, it's early in the season. But the reality is, Dodger fans, we're not going to be happy if they just win the division. But if they win the National League, we're not going to be happy. Unless they win the World Series, season sucked, right? And you see, not all players on the Dodgers can handle the pressure of high expectations. Look at the Yankees. Did you hear that the Yankees were booing one of their big players, Aaron Judge? He's coming up to the plate. He's struggling this season. The fans are booing. Do you know what it's like to play under pressure? I wish God had given me all this talent. I wish God had given me this. Do you know what kind of pressure you would be dealing with? But when you don't have that kind of expectation on your life, there's the freedom to develop. It's kind of hey, that coach and that Yankee team, we can just have fun. We can just get better. There's no pressure because everyone expects us to lose. And when you start doing well and you start, there's no pressure. We look at this and we're what am I going to do here? Because God, I've been praying for you to bring me provision, and I look at my life and I don't see any provision. I was looking at this group of kids, and what I wanted was a dream team. Remember the dream team, the 1992 USA basketball team that had Magic Johnson, it was Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Patrick Ewing, I think. This team was stacked. When we're praying to God for provision, we want him to answer it and bring us a dream team. David was looking at this group, and it did not look like a dream team. No expectations. You would look at this group of people, and most people, remember a few years ago, I don't know how long it was, when people would do this? Do you know what that means? Loser. People would be you look at this team and you think loser. Did you ever just look at what God's brought in your life and you feel the resources, the connections, what God's birthed in your spirit, but then you look at what you have and you just feel it's losing. It's losing. Anyone here wish that they would have bought Apple stock when it went public? You wish you look at these companies and you're well, you could buy it now, but it's a lot. But when it first went public, there was a lot of people that we're overlooking it. There was not a whole lot of expectation. You see that there is hidden value in things that we don't see because of expectation. Many of us are praying, God, bring more into my life. But I have an announcement. What if God is looking for you to bring more out of what he has already given you in your life? David could have looked at these men and said, there ain't nothing good that can come out. Oh, but David knew. How did David know? How did he know? How did David know? How did he know? How did he know? How did David know? David knew what it was like to be overlooked. To be overlooked. You see, David was not Israel's first king. Anyone know what it's like to not be the first choice? You're at the job only because the person they wanted to hire took a job somewhere else. You're only married to that person sitting next to you because the person they wanted to marry. So like, you know what it's like to be the son. So David was Israel's second king. Saul was Israel's first king, and Saul looked like a king. But Saul was concerned with what people thought. Saul was not concerned with pleasing God. Saul was concerned with his appearance, with how people thought. Lindsay wants everyone to be happy all the time. She wants to be just like, she'll say, why can't everyone just be happy? Why can't they be happy? It's like, nobody's ever going to be happy. Rather than focusing on people being happy, what if we focus on people being healthy? If you're a parent, like not all your kids are ever going to be happy. Much less like about what you're having for dinner, where you're going to eat. But you could work on having a healthy family. Saul was so concerned, and God had rejected him. So David was the second king, but David was overlooked when he was anointed king. The prophet Samuel goes to the house of Jesse to anoint Israel's next king. And the prophet Samuel already knew what rejection felt like. How do we know? Because God told him, I believe it was in around 1 Samuel chapter 8, he's like, because Israel wanted a king. And he's like, but Samuel had been their man. Samuel had been their prophet. And God says, it is not you that the people have rejected. It's me that the people have rejected as their king. And so here Samuel goes to the house of Jesse to anoint Israel's next king. And Jesse lines up his sons. And Samuel sees his oldest, Eliab. And he thinks this is Israel's next king because he looks, this is the prophet of Israel who's going by what he sees, who's going by appearance. And God says, no. 1 Samuel 16:7, that the Lord does not look at the things that man looks at. People, I'm giving you the old version, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so many of us are so busy looking at the outward appearance, so busy focused on what our outward appearance looks like. How long did you spend getting ready today? That's where you got some people looking at each other, right? How long did you spend getting ready on the inside to be in God's house? Getting your heart ready, getting your spirit ready. We're so like, God looks at what people don't look at. People look on the exterior, but God looks at the heart. And so he goes, and God's like, it's not him, it's not the oldest. He goes through sons, like, none of them. You got any more sons? You would think Jesse would have invited all of his sons to be there. Like, well, even if it was, I don't think so, but just in case. It means like he wouldn't even, I would think it'd be like there's no way it could be David, or I would have had David here. Do you have anyone else here? Oh, it's just David, the youngest, but he's out with the sheep. Oh, Bring him here. David was not even invited to the party. Do you know what it's like to be overlooked? Do you know what it's like to be not even included in the discussion at your company? Like you could have offered great input, but you weren't even brought into the meeting. Do you know what it's like to be overlooked? I wonder if that's how David knew not to overlook other people. Because if they didn't see it in me, but God saw something, maybe I need to see what God sees. We need to start looking at what God sees, because God saw in David hidden talent. Do you know what God sees in you? Hidden talent. Other people might have overlooked you. Other people might have passed you over. You might not have been their first choice, but God is looking on the inside of you. And he says, God, how does God know there's hidden talent in you? Because he created you. God does not create average. He does not create ordinary. You have so much talent. You have so much ability on the inside of you, and it might be hidden from people, but it is not hidden from God. Oh, there's something of value there. It's about not being focused on what we don't have, but being focused on what we do have. So, you might have been overlooked. But what if you make up in your mind that you're going to do some uncommon things like David? Because David was uncommon. How he lived his life, it was uncommon. David had an uncommon patience. I don't like this. When you study David's life, you see how David was anointed king when he was young. How old was he? 12, 13, 15, maybe up to 17 or so. David was young. He's anointed king, and then he goes back out with the sheep. Like, I thought I'm supposed to be king. Now he's not just with the sheep, but now he's playing music for the king. I thought I'm anointed king, and now here I am entertaining, calming the current king. Then he becomes a food delivery boy. There's a process of bringing out that hidden talent. There's a process of God strengthening our character. It's a process. We don't always like that character. We don't always like that process. I don't like to have patience. Here you have David who's so patient. But not only did he have an uncommon patience, he had an uncommon fight. It wasn't what do you fight for? We live in a world where people are fighting for fame. Not just to be celebrities in movies or to put out music, but to go viral on all the social media platforms. But I believe as followers of Jesus that there are some things that are worth fighting for. Our faith is worth fighting for. And if you don't know, it is a fight right now, even in this country. Not just in other parts of the world. In this country, the freedom of religion, the free speech. There are certain things that are worth. Is anyone going to fight? There are some things that are worth fighting for. What about our families? It's not the government's job. It's quiet. It's not the therapist's job to be your kid's parent. Train up a child in the way. This is the role of you see, what's trying to be disrupted is the family unit. Our freedom, our future is worth fighting for. And maybe no one else wants to fight. David showed up as a food delivery boy. It maybe seemed like the least prepared, because they're all warriors being taunted by a giant named Goliath. And it's like, if no one else is going to fight, this is something that is worth fighting for. David was unique. How would a boy take on a giant? who would take a sling and face someone with a sword? You ever look like even the King Saul tried to say, put on my armor, but it didn't fit. And I wonder how many people are still wearing other people's armor, other people's things. We're putting on what culture's wanting to dress us in this, and this is how you go into battle, and this is how you raise kids, and this is how, oh, you want to be a Christian? You can do that, but just keep it to yourself. And just we're dressed like David's like, this doesn't fit. If you want to become all that God's called you to become, you got to make up in your mind that this doesn't fit. But all I got is a sling. All I am is a boy. Oh, but there are some things that are worth fighting for. You don't need to be the same as everyone else. What about if you be different? We're supposed to be a peculiar people. Supposed to be unique. Rather than trying to fit in, it is time that we stand out. David. There was something about David's worship. David's worship, it seemed extreme. Now, Lindsay will tell you, I'm an extreme person. I don't do anything halfway. I either don't do it at all, or I'm totally into it. If I get into a hobby, I'm going to get totally into it. Like if I get my mindset on something, I'm just laser focused on that. I wonder how much of our lives are spent worrying. We're worried. We're worried. We're worried about all the things that might happen. Talk with people who want prayer. I'm like, what's going on? And they talk with me about all the things that might happen. Well, what if this happens? Well, what if full-blown war breaks out in the Middle East? Well, what if my boss fires me? Well, what if my spouse leaves me? Well, what if I get cancer? Well, what if you're just worried about all the things that might happen. Do you know that excessive worry can impact you? You know that excessive worry can impact your digestion? You know that excessive worry can impact how quickly you process things, your cognitive ability? You know that excessive worry, I'm not just talking about like sweat and you get like smelly armpits. I'm talking about it can actually cause you to not even have an appetite. Yet how many of us worry way too much? Do you know what excessive worship can do? You know excessive worship can give you a peace that passes understanding? Do you know that excessive worship can give you a joy that does not make sense? Do you know that excessive worship can give you a faith to take on insurmountable problems? That's why, you're like, well, I only get to worship on Sundays. What are you talking about? Every single, so if we're talking about music is one element. Lindsay has worship music playing all throughout the house, all the time, and she decides to do all the runs. It's like Whitney Houston has been added to every single worship song ever, you know? You see David, how did David worship? The Psalms we have, you see that there's a beautiful worship expressed. You could worship, you could just start writing. Writing could be a form of worship. Oh, you can have music, as we talked about. David played the harp. Or you don't play any instruments. You don't even sing on key all the time. You can still you could still think about, you could make a joyful noise, right? It's joyful to her. Do you know that David danced before the Lord? David, this challenges me because, I'm not a very good dancer. I remember being a youth pastor, the church I was on staff at. But this was many, many years ago, and they'd start doing, when I think about his goodness and what he's done for me, when I think about his goodness and how he set me free, I'm gonna, some of you know the song, I'm gonna dance, 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 dance. Like, be like, I don't know about me, I don't dance. You know, my dancing is like, I just, you know, I don't dance. Why? Who told me that? Like, what about if we really get excessive in our worship? What if we come in here and this place, like it is, our worship is amazing and our team is fantastic. Do you know how good our worship team is, by the way? These people could be anywhere. Our worship director is actually in Asia right now because he is the music director for a very well-known worship artist. And so they're doing and he gets asked all the time to go, but he just wants to be here because something is happening. I want to call on us to get excessive in our worship. Worship can get you out and worship can get you through. Do you remember Paul and Silas? In a prison? Worship can break you out. And you're like, well, I'm not in a prison. I used to be. Maybe. Anyone? No. You're like, no, that's the 9. This is the 9. That's the noon. The noon has all the... You're not in a physical prison, but you could be in an emotional prison. You could be in a prison of depression. Prison of anxiety. Worship can break you out. Worship can break you free. Worship is a weapon. We see that there's some things that there were things that were so unique about David, that there was why were these individuals drawn to David? Because there was something different about David. When you're being rejected by the world and you're rejected and you're looked down upon, to be drawn to someone who doesn't just look past you, but someone who sees potential that's in you. The potential that's in you. Who doesn't just look at you and they might not be doing but you know what it's like when people look at you and all they see is a loser. All they see is the worst mistakes that you've ever made. But something happened with these individuals, and it was so unexpected. Because on this journey with David, because there's times where we don't think life's going to get better. We think it's always going to be this way. My marriage is always going to be this way. My boss will always mistreat me. I will always struggle financially. I will always be depressed. I will always be that way. And it's hard to see things that are different until you walk with someone who's been treated, who's dealt with that, and you begin to see, wait, hold on, you got through that? That's why I love our live testimony gatherings. And I think it's just awesome for us to share our stories so other people get like, wait, Joel, you've been through that? And look at, like, wait, hold on, your marriage went through that and look where it is now? Wait, hold on, you dealt with that situation and look what God has done in your life to be able to come out of all that. On this walk with God, the unexpected can take place. The unexpected, where you discover that God has so much more for me. I love what it says in First Corinthians. This is also out of the Message. It says, 1 Corinthians 26-31. It says, take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you. Not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose these nobodies to expose the hallowed pretensions of the somebodies. That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything that we have, that is everything, right thinking, right living, and a clean slate, a fresh start, comes from God by the way of Christ Jesus. Does anyone believe that today? Nobody expected a boy to defeat a giant. Nobody expected someone with a sling to take down someone with a sword. Nobody expected a group of misfits to become David's mighty men. And when you read about these individuals, you'll read about individuals who killed giants themselves. Oh, these misfits. You'll read about individuals who took on hundreds, one person defeating hundreds of other warriors. You see, we buy into the lies. The lies some of us have bought into is, I'm not enough. I don't have enough. I'm not educated enough. I'm not experienced enough. I don't have the resources. I am not enough. But we see how God turns sinners into saints. We see how God turns the weak into the strong. And we even see how God turns defeat into victory. To the point where you look back and you say, if it weren't for God, you're like, I feel like I'm a nobody. Well, I want you to know that God calls and picks nobodies to become a somebody without asking anybody in front of everybody.